So right now I'm going to talk about how to remove the auger bearing on a Salt Dogg SHPE 2000 series insert spreader, salt spreader. And that's the book from Salt Dogg. As you see, here's the auger assembly that we're taking a look at right now. I've taken it off of the whole undercarriage of the truck. It's pretty easy to do that. All you need to do is remove from the plastic carriage, the hopper inside the truck. These bolts right here, they're stainless steel, and they go in from the outside, and then this whole thing just comes off right on the bottom side of the truck. What I'm trying to do right now, what I've already done actually, is taking this bearing off. Sometimes this bearing here on the end, it's exposed to the elements. It does have a grease fitting on it, but sitting in things, sometimes they seize up. This bearing, it's free. It does make some noise, and since I'm in the middle of another project, actually replacing the motor on this Salt Dogg, you can see this on my other video, but I'm trying to replace this electric motor. At the same time, I'm just going to go ahead and switch out this bearing on the end. You can buy these bearings pretty cheap. I think 25 bucks from a dealer. You can also go to a bearing supply and probably buy them for half of that. It's just a regular pillar block bearing. Has a couple set screws right there. So to get this thing off, what I had to do was first of all loosen. As you can see, the stainless bolts on the inside are welded to the carriage. So what I've done is I've taken a 9/16 wrench and I've just loosened these two stainless lock nuts right here. I've gotten to the point where they're finger tight. After I did that, there is no room in here initially in between the two surfaces to put a bearing puller on there. Like I normally would to pull off a bearing, I'd use a bearing puller or a 3-jaw puller and pull that off. There's two problems with that on this assembly. One, there's not any room to put your puller in between the stainless housing here and the bearing. And secondly, if you can see it with the poor light, but the inside of this shaft is hollow. So, since it's hollow, it makes it very difficult to put your puller on there, because normally your puller will go on the front face of the shaft, and it'll pull it off like that where it pushes into the middle. That's really difficult because it's hollow. So I had to come up with the other option. If it's in the truck, it's going to be a little bit tougher if you still have this mounted, this whole assembly mounted on your spreader. But what I've done is I just went and I grabbed my 1/4-inch chisel and I've put it in right through here. There's enough room right there on that assembly. You can actually squeeze it in between the auger shaft and the back side of the inside of that bearing race. So I squeezed it in just like that. I turned the auger so that assembly was up and I had some room. Then I put it right in there, and I used my little mini sledgehammer. I just popped that in. And I kept tapping it and tapping it. But what you want to do anytime you're removing a bearing from a shaft or something that's precision tight fit is you want to work both sides. So you'd want to work this side and then this side equally, back and forth and back and forth. If not, it'll put it on an angle, put it on a bind, and it won't want to slide off the shaft. So it's also a good idea to use some PB Blaster or some penetrating lubricant in all the surfaces you can get to, down on the top here, in the front, inside there. Before you start using the chisel, of course, you do need to remove, I should have showed you this before, there's a couple little set screws, and they go right inside those holes right there. Make sure you clean out the tops of the set screws really well because they get rust and grease in there. Right at the tops of those, they get rust and grease. I think this is a 1/8 of an inch set screw. Sometimes they're different depending on where you get the bearing and who manufactures, but that set screw just holds the shaft inside this bearing race so it doesn't come apart. But anyway, you take these set screws out. To do that, just get yourself an 1/8 inch like T-handle Allen wrench or something like that. You know, any of those type Allen things will work. Get it down in there, take it out. Be careful. If you have any trouble with it, once again, use some PB Blaster on the set screws. Let it sit. And and it'll come off. If you really have trouble and it doesn't want to come apart, unit factor, normally you're going to replace this bearing with a new one, so you don't have to worry too much about damaging it. But if you're chiseling from this side, you want to be sure to make sure you actually hit on the inside of the bearing race and not in the bearing, because you'll split the bearing, the ball bearings inside, and ruin the bearing. So if you do plan on putting this back together with the existing bearing, make sure you keep your chisel right up against the auger housing downwards, so you hit right up against where it flush meets. If all else fails and you cannot get it off, a penetrating lube and some elbow grease and a little aggressiveness, you can use a torch, a MAP gas torch or an oxygen torch. Any sort of torch like this will help, and you can heat up the surface around this outside edge. You don't want to heat the inside because that'll make it expand. And if you cook this too much, you're going to ruin your bearing because you'll cook out the grease that's inside the bearing. You can re-grease it, but a lot of times if you heat that up and bake it, that will trash your bearing. So you want to try to heat it around the outside if you have to. Heat it up, and then you can try to knock it out from the inside. Now I've got the thing knocked out enough that you can see I have some play on it, and I've got it peeling away from the shaft. At this point, after you've knocked it out through this way, I would not advise putting a screwdriver or a pry bar in here, because if you do that, you're liable to mess up your stainless carriage or bend it. So what I would suggest you do at this point, if you still can't get this off and it's still seized onto the shaft and you still have to pound and can't get in there to pound any farther, I would loosen, and I did loosen these 3 bolt holes that hold the main auger assembly on. You can see there's 3 holes right there. Those are 1/2 inch size stainless steel bolts. I've loosened all those. What that does is it gives me enough play that I can move this whole assembly back and forth. So that's how I'm going about getting it off of there. So basically you want to chisel from the inside of this. Last suggestion I have, if it's still stuck on there, is put these nuts back on. Move it all the way up to the housing like so. And then you can loosen these 3 bolts. Now you need to loosen these 3 bolts so that this auger shaft will slide out when you come from this angle. And what you want to do is, if you look inside of the end of the hole, you can see the auger shaft inside the bearing. What we want to try to do is line it up so that you can take your chisel on the inside of there, like so, and hit just the inside of that auger shaft. If you do that, then it should force the auger shaft out through the inside, and in turn loosen your bearing. Hopefully that's helped. And that's how you would remove a bearing off a Salt Dogg spreader insert.